It's the weekend, and that means Film Focus with Mike Laidman. Here he is with a look at what's new in local theaters.
This week, we're going to take a peek at two movies that couldn't be more different. On one end of the spectrum, the Jason Statham action flick Wild Card, and squarely at the other, Disney's new live-action version of the classic Cinderella. Welcome to another edition of Film Focus. I'm Mike Laidman. Let's get in our dose of action first today and check out Wild Card. Jason Statham is fully in his wheelhouse here, playing the tough, cool guy, firmly on the side of good. We can't help but root for him and his cause. As the appropriately named Nick Wilde, Statham plays a Las Vegas bodyguard with lethal professional skills and a personal gambling problem. When a friend is beaten by a sadistic thug, Nick strikes back, only to find out the thug is the son of a powerful mob boss. Suddenly, Nick is plunged into the criminal underworld, chased by enforcers. Having raised the stakes, Nick has one last play to change his fortunes, and this time, it's all or nothing. Wild Card, like many of Statham's action films, unfortunately isn't earning very positive reviews. It can be tough to break out of the typical action mold and do something different. If, however, you're a fan of Statham and of action, take an evening to check this movie out. Also opening this week is Cinderella, a movie that is winning over critics and audiences alike. It's being called refreshingly traditional in a revisionist era and proves Disney hasn't lost any of its old-fashioned magic. The story of Cinderella is familiar to all. When young Ella's mother dies, her father remarries. But when her father unexpectedly passes away, she is left at the mercy of her cruel stepmother and two stepsisters. She never loses hope, however, and comes to meet a dashing stranger in the woods who will change her fortunes forever. The production value is top-notch, with sumptuous costumes. The actors give very watchable performances, and director Kenneth Branagh knows just how to sweep us up in the ecstatic thrall of the familiar without breaking from fantasy or making his central messages about bravery, compassion, and self-confidence feel superficial.
Sanghyowon, a botanical garden which opened last year, is holding its first ever Jeju Tulip Festival, beginning March 20th in Sangnyeodong Seogwipo. Catch a rare glimpse into a Korean documentary film, My Love Don't Cross That River, at Jeju Culture and Arts Center, March 25th. Celebrate the beauty of the Jeju cherry tree at the 24th Jeju Cherry Blossom Festival, which is being held in the area around the Jeju Sports Complex. This weekend is your last chance to see an exhibition of artifacts and relics from the ancient mainland city-state of Daegaya at Jeju National Museum.
The skies should clear up later on Saturday. For the details, here's your forecast. The morning low in Jeju City will be 9 and the afternoon high 17 degrees. Temperatures in Seogwipo will fall between 12 and 19. The low before lunch in Seongsan will be 10 and the high later on 17 degrees. It won't be quite as warm in Gosan, only getting up to about 15. And the morning low up on the mountain at Songpanak will be 7 and the afternoon high 15 degrees. Out on the water, winds will be out of the northwest and north at 6 to 11 meters per second, and seas will be relatively calm. And here's what to expect next week. Today on Talk Jeju, we're talking about the local golf industry. As always, Todd Thacker joins me in the studio. Well, Todd, the weather's finally warming up and we're already seeing some green grass sprouting all over the island. And this is certainly good news for any golfers we might have watching. I am not a golfer myself, but today's topic has been in the news and there are some interesting elements to the story.
Yes, I agree. I mean, Jeju has been a sort of a mecca for golfers from the mainland, of course, and in particular from Japan. I'm at the airport all the time, picking up friends and family, and I'm sure you've noticed this too. A lot of people who come through the arrivals gates have their clubs in tow.
Certainly, right.
Yeah. So I mean, no doubt, this is a big business for Jeju, and it's not even just the golfing itself. There's also these associated resorts and sort of high-end accommodations that are built near the courses or on the courses. So a lot of people come and have an evening out with their friends and family. They stay in these accommodations. In fact, there are a lot of off-season specials that are available, and even sometimes you don't even need to know a member or be a member to stay there.
So how many courses / resorts are we talking about?
Well, there are about 24 on the island, and they're not doing very well, unfortunately. First off, of course, there's a lot of competition, and between them, we're basically spoiled for choice, so to speak. Now, let me give you some context. Jeju got its first golf course only just recently, basically in 1966. That's the Jeju Country Club. And, the rest of these facilities were built in the 80s and 90s when the economies of Korea and Japan were booming and golf was very, very popular. Certainly the Japanese golfers looked at Jeju as a kind of very convenient location.
And inexpensive, I guess, certainly relative to courses and fees in Japan.
Yes, that's very true. Now, unfortunately, for the last few years, we've seen numbers drop, and there have been a number of reasons for this. When it comes to the Japanese golfers, we had, particularly after the 2011 Tohoku earthquake, and then the subsequent tsunami and the Fukushima nuclear disaster, that we saw numbers of Japanese golfers here drop dramatically. And then, of course, domestically too, the sinking of the Sewol ferry last April was a complete tragedy, disaster, and the tourism numbers, generally speaking, and also the golf tourism numbers on Jeju dropped a lot. In fact, in the first quarter of 2014, the provincial government said that golf patronage had been 327,000 in total, and that was down 14,000 from the previous year.
So I know we've had many news items here in the last year or two covering the financial woes of these courses and companies, including bankruptcy proceedings on a number of them and other requests for tax breaks from the provincial government to help keep their overhead as low as possible.
That's right. I mean, the Jeju Country Club that I mentioned earlier, it's the island's first, and it's also, in bankruptcy proceedings currently. In fact, even last year it was put on the auction block and it received exactly 0 bidders.
So that seems like it's kind of a good indicator of the kind of dire situation the industry finds itself in.
That's right, and a number of other clubs are on the verge of bankruptcy at the present time. Now, you mentioned tax breaks earlier. There were last year 9 clubs, private clubs, petitioned the provincial government to get tax breaks, and their argument was that they were paying up to 10 times what the public clubs were paying. Now, since then, that request has been completely rebuffed by the province's lawyers.
And I gather that even the resort accommodations you mentioned previously, these are also subject to the effects of Jeju's so-called oversupply, the glut of lodging facilities.
That's a very good point. Now, given last year's occupancy rates, now in January, last January, the province projected that in 2015, this year, we'll see about 70% occupancy island-wide. So it seems like that's yet another sort of revenue stream that these golf clubs are seeing dry up due to oversupply. So
what measures have provincial officials put into place or proposed to revitalize the golf industry?
Right, so some recent ideas that have been bandied about include, for example, making the use of caddies and carts voluntary. Up until now, it was mandatory, and they're sort of looking at the idea of reducing the overall cost of a particular, like one round of golf. They've also been talking about making these membership-only clubs, making them open their doors to the public. That's another option. And then, of course, they've been hosting more events and tournaments here, like the Jeju International Golf Festival. That started in 2011 and involves a number of golf courses around the island. That's been held since then, but this year we're not too sure if they're actually going to hold one. Okay, anything else? Well, the province and the JTO, the Jeju Tourism Organization, they've also been sponsoring LPGA stars like Lee Bo-mi and In Bi-bak, making them honorary ambassadors for Jeju. And sort of the idea is that they will promote Jeju golf and build its international brand as they travel around the world competing. Okay, now is perhaps the time that we should address the elephant in the room, so to speak. And of course, I'm talking about what the future holds for the industry vis-a-vis China. Yes, and that does look like that's going to be the future for Jeju golf, looking at the Chinese golf market. Now, even earlier this month, we saw that the provincial government and officials from the provincial government and the JTO, they traveled to Beijing to the China Golf Show, and they were essentially presenting Jeju's golf courses, the merits, and these facilities that we have here. Now, when I was researching this report, I did keep this in mind. I was thinking, how popular is golf in China? Sure. And I found that there's even a book on the subject. It's called The Forbidden Game, Golf and the Chinese Dream. And it was written in 2014 by Dan Washburn. Sounds like an interesting read. Yeah, it is. For example, I didn't know that way back in 1949, Mao Zedong actually banned the sport in China. And even after all this time, golf still has a tremendous stigma as being an elitist sport. So much so that even if you're a government official, you really can't openly play without being labeled corrupt. But I'm assuming that people still play in the millions, maybe? Well, according to the book, no one actually knows exactly. Obviously, this taboo makes it such that you're not going to advertise that you're a golfer. But they best guess say that it's in between the few 100,000 to a couple of million golfers. Interestingly, in 2004, Beijing officially put a moratorium on the construction of any new golf courses in China, but it's actually largely ignored. Really? Yeah. I mean, when I looked at it, in 2004, 2005, China had just 170 courses. Okay. And estimates now are that it's just over 1,000. So that's according to Bloomberg Businessweek. Anyway, so I'm saying if there's any change in the official policy on golf, I think we will see an explosion of Chinese golfers in China. And then, of course, they'll probably put Jeju on their bucket list as a golf destination. Well, I guess we'll have to keep an eye on developments here and overseas. Thanks, Todd, and we'll see you next week. Always a pleasure. If you have any questions or comments, please email them to talkjeju@kctvjeju.com. Thank you for tuning in today, and I hope you'll join us next week at the same time. If you can't wait until then, though, visit us online at eng.kctvjeju.com or follow us on Facebook. 시청해주신 여러분, 고맙습니다.